K through 12 education reporter at the Columbus Dispatch, Michael Lee, joins us now to discuss the latest on the teacher strike in Columbus. Michael, welcome to Rising.
Thank you so much for having me.
So give us an update. What was this strike about to begin with?
Yeah, so just for some context, there had been 23 negotiating sessions since March. The Columbus Education Association, which is the union here in Columbus that represents over 4,500 teachers, school nurses, support staff, and etc. They had essentially been asking for a lot of for example, just some things, HVAC systems to be upgraded and updated, smaller class sizes, more planning time for teachers, and there are a few other kind of talking points as well of what they wanted in their new contract, and so this had gone on for a while, and last month in July, they had essentially the board of education here in Columbus had given the union its first final offer, and I say first because we're going to get to some other things, but the first final offer on July 28th in a negotiation session that the union claimed lasted 1 minute, and because of that, and they had no more sessions scheduled in August as well, and so kind of the timeline here was on August 4th the union members had they had met together and they had voted to suggest to their legislative assembly to issue a 10-day notice of the union's intent to strike. And then, 7 days later, they filed that that notice to intent to strike. And then, as we all know, they voted on Sunday night, August 21st, to officially start striking this week, which is, the first week of classes. So.
And so how did this end up where it is right now? Like, what were the big points, the pivotal, sort of points in these negotiations?
Yeah, and so the union has, kind of repeatedly told us that, again, with those, there are a handful of schools here that don't necessarily have HVAC systems, so that's heating and cooling, whatnot, upgraded or fully upgraded. And so one of the biggest things, we had heard from the union was that they wanted this, guarantee in writing. The district had mentioned that, they were using COVID relief funds, ESSER funds to, upgrade these HVAC buildings. And it was kind of a separate thing, but the union was, had been saying, we want this in writing. And, this is something that, we want guarantees on. And so there was that, as well as, smaller class sizes specifically. And, the district had last week gave the union a kind of what they were calling the final their second final offer, right? And so this was, they had mentioned that they would cap the class sizes at 28 and eventually reduce that size to 27, and other things as well, right? More planning time for teachers. And then in the district's final offer last week, they had talked about that they were going to give teachers essentially an extra day of planning, and then also just essentially other ways as well to retain teachers in the district. That was another huge sticking point. So
historically, when teachers have gone on strike, they've often had significant support from the community, whether it's Columbus or elsewhere, even though it really inconveniences people in the community. But there's a sense of there had for generations been this kind of sense of solidarity between the community and their teachers. And I'm wondering if that was frayed by COVID at all. I'm wondering how the community responded to this teacher strike compared to how they might have, say, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, we can't say exactly for sure, what the effects of COVID specifically are, but, talking to teachers, me and my colleagues, we had, gone to the picket lines, talked to parents over the phone, in speaking to parents about this, a lot of them had, talked about, not crossing the virtual picket line, right? And the district had, so specifically Wednesday was the first day of classes for Columbus City schools. For most of their schools, their kindergarten starts next week, if I remember correctly, and they also have a year-round school that began in July. But on the first day of classes, we went out to the picket lines. We spoke to parents on the phone, about the support they were having for their teachers, and a lot of students came out that day. Parents we talked to, obviously, again, like I mentioned, part of it was they didn't want to cross this virtual picket line to support their teachers. But other parents we spoke to, they were kind of just exhausted with remote learning, and they felt that the quality of education and this actually included parents that still logged their kids on Wednesday morning as well, which was they were saying in our reporting that you know a lot of this was, like I mentioned, they were just kind of exhausted from remote learning, right? And they felt the quality of education wasn't as good as maybe even being in the classroom specifically. But, even, kids we spoke to, elementary schoolers, high schoolers, one of the things that was important to them was just being in a room with their teachers. And I remember one of the kids, he went out to the picket lines because he simply just he loves the teachers, and they want to support the teachers, and that's what we were hearing as well.
Yeah, and on that broader question, how did, as you watched the pandemic play out, how did the changes to education affect the relationship between parents and teachers, parents and the school district? Obviously, that's a really fraught issue all over the country, but particularly in Columbus with the school system. How did it affect those relationships?
Yeah, and I think it definitely did. Again, talking to parents, right, and again circling back to this whole, a lot of students had gone through remote learning and wanted to be with their teachers, and a couple students that we had spoken to as well, they had talked about how especially seniors this year. I spoke to one senior, and a parent of a senior as well, who they were worried about this strike going on. Because they didn't have, they've essentially had a few years of that disruption, right, with COVID, and remote learning then, and hybrid learning, and then now, at the time, the possibility of the strike going longer than obviously it did, but it was kind of that worry that they wouldn't be able to be with their teachers, they wouldn't be able to be with their classmates again, like in the past few years where it was kind of either again online completely or on and off in the hybrid learning model.
Right. Yeah, it has been a rough ride for sure. Michael, thanks for joining us, and thanks for your reporting.
Thank you again for having me.
And we will have more Rising right after this.